Hello, everybody, and welcome to what could prove to be another very interesting, I should say, BAInsights session. And today we're going to be talking about whether business analysts need to learn how to code. And today, to join us on that really interesting topic, I'm pleased to have Nitin and Emal join us. And I'm going to ask both of them to introduce themselves, essentially. Let's start with Nitin, if we may.
Thanks, John. Thank you for inviting me on this session. I have been working in the business analysis industry from quite some time now. I am an IIBA certified business analyst. Worked on projects like data reporting, regulatory reporting, AI/ML, then digital journey design. So that has been my journey till now. The topic which we have chosen to speak on is a very interesting topic, and the upcoming business analysts. This is the question for most of the upcoming business analysts: do we need to learn coding? So really happy to discuss that topic with Emal and yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitin. And Emal.
My name is Emal Bariali. I've been a business analyst since 2005. And before that, I spent about 7 years just kind of getting educated into the profession. I've done like 20 plus projects of all kinds, and we often get a lot of questions from business analysts about this specific topic. So very interested in seeing if we can all together just provide some guidance to the folks that are looking to figure out what kind of skills they need. So good to meet you both.
Excellent, thank you, Mel. All right, so I should say to anybody as well, if you like the video, please subscribe and put a thumbs up, as well as sharing any comments about this video or other videos that you'd like to see. Let's dive straight into the topic, and maybe the right one to start with is really whether coding skills are becoming essential for business analysts, and could you share a rationale for your answer as well? And let's start with Nitin.
Sure. I believe having coding skills is not a must-have, but a good to have, John, because these skills actually increases your credibility in the market, and it gives you more opportunities when it comes to data projects, when it comes to any other digital projects, any regulatory reporting, because nowadays every organization is making data-driven decisions, which are tech and technology-driven decisions, and having an insight of data is really, really important nowadays. So that's my take on it. It is not a must-have, but good to have skill, which will, increase your credibility in the market. You'll be able to gain better trust among the stakeholders, whether business stakeholders, whether technical stakeholders. So I have been in the data world for a long time. So for me, coding is really important. That shapes up the entire requirements for me, starting from requirement elicitation, validation, verification, development. So I would say it is good to have skill.
Thanks, Nitin. It's an interesting perspective, of course, because it's easy to think about coding as just developing the whole system or the shiny front end, but it can mean anything really, from the data interfaces, systems, or front end or otherwise as well. So good start to that question. Thank you. Emal, what would be your view?
I'm completely with Nitin on this one. I think it is nice to have, depending on the type of situation you're in, but not at all mandatory to become a business analyst. The way that I kind of see it is that there are certain coding skills I think that are probably a little bit more valuable than others for business analysts. The one that really kind of jumps to mind for me is SQL. And it's more of a query language, but from our point of view, we can just call it coding. But the reason why I kind of separate that one out is because as an analyst, especially if you're much more of a systems analyst or like a technical analyst type of role, you're often going to run into situations that you don't necessarily need SQL for, but it's very, very helpful for you to have SQL. So an example I can give there is that, let's say, there might be a project that's going on that you're not on, right? So it might be a project somewhere else in the organization that's happening. And somebody on the project realizes, hey, wait, this project has a massive, let's say, data migration component to it. You might be called on in that organization as kind of the systems analyst, say, hey, you're going to kind of lead the data migration for this project, or you're going to have some contribution to it. If that ever happens, then SQL becomes really important if you're in a custom build environment, because SQL is essentially the coding language you use to extract data out of the old system. You might use SQL to actually do some of the data cleansing that's needed. And then you will have to find some ways to import it into the new system. So that's just one example where SQL would come in. I would say that for an analyst who wants to learn coding, that would probably be the first skill. But again, by no means is it mandatory unless the job posting specifically says, hey, this is a mandatory skill for this analyst. I would say that analysts probably shouldn't spend too much time on trying to learn it as their first skill.
Yeah, and I would agree on that nice to have element of coding that you both called out. And it's interesting, Emal, you call out SQL because I guess the closest, or almost the closest I've got personally to coding, at least at the start, was using SQL to extract some data and to maybe understand it a little bit more so that perhaps I could take the reliance away from going to the technology team to give me the data. And when I ultimately go back and I give them a specification on what I need, it's a bit more informed because I've had that chance to look at the data, maybe manipulate it, understand its relationships as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, very definitely resonated. And for me, I mean, I think the thing that I would add, because I definitely agree with you both, it's a nice to have skill. I think overall, but I think some of the understandings of how developers develop and some of the understanding of what they need from the BA, I think those fundamentals are definitely useful, and so appreciating what the developers do, how they code, what they need from you, all of those things that sit around it without the coding itself, really, really beneficial to get that perspective.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think you've
100%.
called out another really important piece of that, I think, because the folks that come into business analysis from the technical world who know how to coding, they oftentimes are much better at predicting what a developer will need from their analysts when the requirements are going downstream, right? So I think that's a really important call out, John.
And from my perspective, I feel we shouldn't look coding, something an alien language. I feel it's a problem-solving skill. I take coding as a problem-solving skill. Whenever you're building something, whenever you're designing something as a business analyst, improving a process, designing a new journey, there is a business logic to it. And that logic, to understand that logic, these coding skills, these SQL comes into handy.
Yeah, that structuring of the information and how the developers are going to structure it and how they're going to break down components. If you can appreciate that, it means perhaps you can deliver the information to the development team in a way that's a bit more compatible with how they need it. Yeah, that's very interesting points. And I mean, we find ourselves in an environment now where there are, like there's low code, no code solutions as well. And I wonder, with those sort of platforms, does it mean that actually maybe the true coding skills of BAs are possibly even less useful than perhaps they might be otherwise? What would be your view on that? Emal, I'd like to ask you first, if I may.
It's an interesting topic. What I would say is, I mean, when it comes to low code tools and skill tools that are available, I would say that most enterprises don't actually even use those because there are a lot of drawbacks that those types of platforms bring with them that enterprises are just not willing to put up with. So for example, if an organization says, hey, we're going to build a piece of software and instead of hiring developers and analysts, we're just going to get our folks to use some no-code tools to put things together. They build an application like that, they eventually run into problems with scaling because those types of platforms don't scale very well, meaning that once you bring on a massive user base, it can really slow down and you really have no control over how to optimize a piece of software that you've built with no-code tools, right? So most enterprises stay away from no-code tools, which means that really kind of the developer jobs in those spaces are probably pretty safe. Doesn't really have much of an impact on what analysts do for really that core reason, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. I am with you on that, Emal. I have hardly seen any of the organizations which I worked for who use no-code methodologies. And when it comes to no-code and low-code, John, these are the technologies, these are the methodologies which will ease out the work, which will reduce the time, but then understanding, like I said in the start as well, understanding that logic, gaining that problem solving skill, analytical skill is really important. These are just the catalysts which will make your life simpler, but are not something which will replace the coding completely from the industry.
Yeah, and what you said there, I mean, totally resonates because I definitely see examples on some of my projects at present, right, around the fact that you come up with this concept, you realise that there might be a solution to maybe organise information or present it or report it, whatever it might be. And a good way to perhaps prototype that as a BA is to use some of that low code, no code type technology to do it. But as Emal points out, as soon as then that solution seems to work for a very small group of users that you're working with, and you look at the enterprise and there's 1,000 users and the data is probably 1,000 times as well, you realize that maybe my Excel spreadsheet that's hanging off the back of it, or my little Power App that's hanging off the back of it as well, isn't necessarily as scalable. Things like access control, some of the other important non-functionals are not there either, and even just the integration perhaps into other tools. So maybe invariably you end up then just naturally talking about the same sorts of concepts that you would explore as a BA in an environment where that isn't even a situation.
Yeah. And I would just to add on a couple of notes onto that too. I would say that we think of developers as just coders, but there's actually quite a bit of complexity in enterprise software development, especially around the areas of software architecture. And the reason why I bring that up is because with no code tools, architects it's a nightmarish job for them to try to architect a solution that's going to be built on no code tools, because it kind of binds their hands in a very tight way. The other thing I would say is that when it comes to no code tools, I'm assuming we're not talking about pre-built software, like off-the-shelf software, like a Workday or let's say a Salesforce or something like that. Those types of no-code tools do exist, and that market is constantly maturing. But I don't think it's encroaching really on a developer or an analyst job in any significant way either. So I just want to kind of throw those two notes in there.
Just adding one thing from my side, John, on that, what Emal said. These no-code tools can help you in automating your basic monotonous work, but cannot replace the entire development team when it comes to developing something, understanding that architecture, understanding the nitty-gritties of the data, understanding the integration of the front end and the back end journey. So that's my take on that.
Yeah, and I mean it's very much, I think, along the lines that just because a BA could use a tool and create an application doesn't mean it's going to be the best application or the right application that they build. In much the same way, as BAs, we sometimes complain if the business try to take over the BA role and or give us a solution, and actually by us doing too much of the coding, we're actually we're repeating the thing that frustrates us and giving it to and frustrating a different audience, albeit.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. That's probably a whole another conversation we can have, but we'll park it for perhaps another episode. But that's an area that I think it's worth exploring for a lot of analysts in another conversation.
Yeah, no, I think so. So I mean, moving away from coding, but more thinking about technology capability more broadly. Is it more important, you think, for BAs to focus on understanding the business, such as the processes, the needs, opportunities of the business they work with, or would you say developing more technical capabilities is more of a priority? And Nitin, I'll go to you on that.
I would say it's both, John. For me, a business analyst is an individual who is approachable, who solves the problems of business as well as tech, and you have to be versatile. You have to keep learning. You have to keep upskilling yourself. That any problem, if you have to build that trust among the business and the tech team, you have to understand their language. That is where the business aspects, what are the objectives, KPIs, etc., comes into picture. That is where the topic which we are discussing, coding, comes into picture. And when I say coding, I'm actually referring to SQL, which Emal pointed out, understanding the logic, understanding at least the flow of the code which the technical team has written, understanding those technical jargons which the team is using. So it builds kind of a shared language amongst the entire team, which is really important. So it has to be both, as per me.
Okay. Emal, what will be your perspective?
I think Nitin got it exactly right. Once again, I think to add to that, I mean, the shared language is really important. One of the areas where analysts tend to struggle. So, I mean, if you look at the position of an analyst, you have a bunch of upstream stakeholders who are kind of your customers. They don't really understand tech. You look on the other side, you have your downstream stakeholders who are often very technical, developers, systems configurators, etc. If you try to put these two folks into a room, it's usually disastrous because this person is speaking a completely different language than this person, and they are trying to have a conversation using two completely different languages. When you're jump in as an analyst into that situation, you really have to understand both worlds to be able to kind of bridge that gap, right? Like think of yourself as a bit of a translator. If you want to translate between two languages, you can't just understand one of the languages, right? You have to understand both to be able to translate effectively. So I think Nitin got it. I'm totally on board with Nitin's take on that. What I would say is that there is also this issue of credibility. So when you join a project, so I'll talk about my own situation. When I join a project, let's say I start a new consulting engagement and they just throw me into a project without really giving me a lot of background and context, I'm often talking with customers, sometimes who are maybe not as open to helping the analysts kind of onboard themselves, right? Because maybe they've had bad experiences dealing with analysts in the past. Maybe they just don't see the role of the analyst as being necessary in the organization, but here I am anyways. And in situations like that, it becomes very difficult to gain the credibility of both of your stakeholder sets, right? If you don't understand the world of your business stakeholders, they probably are going to be a little bit hesitant in giving you their time because they are not going to feel like they can trust you to understand what they're really saying and to push forward what it is that they're looking for. That lack of credibility kind of magnifies when you get into the technical side, because most developers, whether we like it or not, most developers don't I would say they don't see analysts as being that helpful to them in many cases. And you sometimes have a bigger point to prove to a developer to say, hey, look, no, I kind of understand where you guys are trying to get at. I am, I'm not a developer, I'm not a coder, but I can give you the level of detail that you need to do your part of the work in a way that makes total sense to you, right? And you have to, when you first walk into a situation, they're going to assume that you're not capable of doing that. And there may be some friction. There may be some developers that don't want to give you their time to do your feasibility analysis on certain types of requirements because they just don't think you can help, right? So even you're in a situation, as a consultant, I find myself in situations like that more often than maybe some other folks who are permanent employees inside the organization. But I go through that all the time. And just knowing that how important it is to gain the trust of both of your stakeholder sets requires you to have a good amount of knowledge across both of these. So, sorry for being so verbose, but that is the situation that I face on a daily basis as a BA consultant.
Yeah, no, I mean that's probably understandable. I think you weren't verbose at all, I should say, Emal. It was insightful. I think it's probably a better word. And I would definitely agree with both of you. I think that balance is really key, because you are a representative in different ways of both the business and technology at different points. I think, definitely what Emal was saying about, sometimes you're in an environment where the development team might be a bit skeptical of the value of a business analyst. And that's almost certainly informed by their experience of perhaps working with other BAs, sometimes maybe junior ones, perhaps. And I think in a practical way, BAs can help that situation by going to speak to technology, speak to the development team, recognise that you're a representative of them as well as the business. So I think that can help get them on side straight away rather than them feeling like you're just telling them that what you need, and then actually taking some time to sit with the developers and understand the types of questions that they need you to answer, or what they haven't had answered previously from past BAs, or how they would like to receive the information, or how are they going to organise or prioritise their work. Because if I take some of those examples, if you're working on a report, and yes, it might be logical to tell the developer what fields you want in your report and what the report looks like. The developer also needs to know how often that data is going to be refreshed, how it's going to be delivered, as it's subject to access controls, some of those quite simple questions. And, by talking to the tech team, you don't have to rely on knowing all of the questions, and you can go to them. It's probably helpful to go to them with some questions already, build up the credibility, but then you can take it to the business, and similarly, because you will then be asking the right questions to the business, you'll be start to build up your credibility there. So I definitely agree with what you're both saying.
This reminds me of an example, a real life example, John. The project which I'm working on right now. So I'm working with tech team, I'm working with UI UX designers, working with marketing, POs, everyone. I mean, it's a collaboration amongst various stakeholders, including third parties as well. So I got to hear this from the tech team that the earlier BAs who were onboarded were just limited. Their roles and responsibilities were just limited to requirement elicitation and then getting those sign-offs and moving to the next project. And that is not how I work, honestly. My sole objective is to stay resourceful. For that, I had to learn Figma, I had to learn SQL, I had to learn APIs, how that JavaScript is written, which helps me in my day-to-day work, which builds that credibility, which Emal was pointing out, which builds that trust. Now, the analysts don't see the developers don't see the business analyst as someone, who will not be able to help us when it comes to solving any kind of problems. Things have changed. So that is really important when you collaborate with tech team as well as business team and upskill yourself based on the requirements.
Yeah, and it feels like whether you've got the development team behind you from the start, or whether they're a little bit more skeptical.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's important to try and provide them with a picture that might be evolving picture, so they can sort of get the context of what they're being asked to do and why. Appreciate in fairly straightforward terms what the business need. And I use the word straightforward terms because sometimes we could be working on things that are quite complicated, and actually they're very niche for a particular piece of business. So it's not, it's quite likely the BA hasn't understood them from the start. So how can we expect the developers to understand them? So giving them a bit of context and taking them through almost a story so they can understand how we've got to a requirement and why it's relevant, so they have that to fall back on, can be as useful as well as getting into the technical side. It makes me. I mean, we've obviously talked about the importance of focusing on both and that balance, which you both make the perfect points about that balance. So then, and I know, Emal, you mentioned SQL as well earlier on. So I guess on that topic, what is the benefits of having a basic understanding of coding language like SQL, like Python, or something similar? And Emal, to yourself first.
What I would say, the way I look at this, John, is that I look at business analysis as really kind of having like a core set of analysis skills that I think every analyst should master.
Yeah.
And then everything outside of that are potentials, areas that you could expand into once you've gotten kind of the core ready. So SQL, I think we've already said, is one of those skills that can help you in certain situations. You might be in other situations. Let's say, for example, you're an analyst that, and you're in an environment where all you deal with is pre-packaged software. In that case, SQL isn't going to be that helpful to you because oftentimes you don't even have access to the database, right? So it's a skill that's not really a core analysis skill. It's out there somewhere, and it can be helpful to you in certain situations. I would say that that's true for really all types of coding. So Python, for example, is the example that we're talking about here. I haven't extended my skill set into Python because that is not an area that I'm interested in exploring as part of my business analysis career. Now, if you are the type of analyst who's very interested in things like data science, then Python becomes something that is a potential skill that you should pick up. But for my own career, I've kind of designed my own BA career to go in a bit of a different direction, right? I've chosen my specialty to be implementing large scale projects, whether they're COTS or custom, et cetera. I haven't chosen to take my career into the data science direction. So that skill for me, isn't that very, very helpful? Not to say that an analyst who decides to take their career in a different direction wouldn't find that skill helpful. So that's kind of how I look at our profession as a whole. And once you master the core skills, you have so many options to expand into, right? Coding is really kind of one category that can open up opportunities for you in more technical business analysis, right? But there's change management. You can pick up some project management skills. You can pick up business architecture skills, which is again, the area I've chosen to expand my career into. And so there are all of these peripheral skills that we essentially have. And I think that coding is kind of in the technical world is one of those big categories. Broadly speaking, that's kind of how I look at it. And so when people ask me, hey, should I learn Perl or Python or any other, let's say, scripting language that's very popular in the data science world, I say, hey, do you want to take your career in that direction? And if so, then it's the right skill for you. I've been doing this job for 20 years now. I have not put in the time and the effort to learn either Perl or Python, right? SQL has been helpful for me, but the other two really haven't, just because of how I've chosen to kind of design and architect my own career. So hopefully that kind of provides some broad context and a bit of a view into how folks can design their careers and figure out what skills they're going to need.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think having that sort of like spherical view almost, that you've got your BA skills at the centre and you've got these other peripheral skills that you can go into. And some of them you might just dip your toe into them and use them very sparingly. Whereas others, perhaps if you become a data scientist, as you say, that would be a good reason to specialise in that particular area. Whereas as an analyst, if your passion is more around, developing front ends and UIs, developing Python is not necessarily going to be the thing that might be helpful, but probably, working on that more user experience, UI, some of the tools that relate to it, might give you that view as well. So yeah, I really like the point you mentioned there, Emal, about it really depends on the individual situation and where they want to take it. Yeah, but Nitin, I'd be interested to hear your perspective as well.
I am 100% with Emal. Emal has kind of summarized it really well. The skills which we learn, like coding and, like I mentioned, Figma, which is UI UX design, all these skills are, icing on the cake. These are just good to have skills. These are not the core skills. These can kind of enhance the core skills which a BA has. For example, if you learn coding, you will be able to collaborate better with the technical team if you are working in a data-oriented projects like data migration. But focus should be on the core BA skills. Rest of the skills are just good to have, and it will give you better opportunities, but it depends where you want to go. Like Emal pointed out, which career path you want to take. The other skills which BAs can look into are data visualization, but again, it depends where your career path, where you want to go in your career. But focus should be on the core BA skills.
Yeah.
And there may be some, sorry to jump in, John, but
there
may be some beginners who are wondering, like, what do you mean by core BA skills, right? There may be some of your audience members who don't know what that skill set is. So, I mean, we could probably have a whole conversation around what those skills are. So I won't get into it at this point unless you choose to take the conversation in that direction. And one other thing I want to kind of say for the folks who are totally new to the profession or trying to get into the profession is that there is no one size fits all answer to the BA skill set once you go beyond the core. So we get a lot of students coming in to us and asking us, hey, just tell me what I need to learn to be a business analyst. Unfortunately, our career, our profession is there's so many options that you could pursue that there's no one size fits all answer. So oftentimes what I end up doing is I end up having a conversation with the student around, hey, what is your natural aptitudes, right? Are you more of a people person? Are you more of a technical person? Because knowing that helps me figure out what the right path is for you, right? I think that with many jobs, there is a prescribed set of things you have to do and learn to do the job well. Our profession is not like that. Unfortunately or unfortunately, for me, I see it as a benefit. For
Yeah,
newcomers, it can be very confusing to figure that out, that picture. So I just want to kind of throw that in there, that if you're totally new to this and you're struggling to figure out why one job posting for an analyst looks so different from another job posting, that's the reason. And there is a way to kind of figure that out if you ask yourself the right questions.
Yeah, I think it's part of the way. And maybe for those people that are new to BA as well, it gives them that reassurance that focusing perhaps on that stakeholder engagement, some of those softer skills and competencies, learning about process and learning about requirements, the real basics, they can be the context you use later on to drill into other things that you might be interested in, and as you say, there's so many different directions that we can travel and go into. That really are the benefits of the BA role, that you don't have to be, no 2 days have to be exactly the same. You can do a load of different things. And even if you choose a data path, you can come back and choose a UI path the next time and something else the next time. So I think it does show that versatility. Knowing how to code as well. Can it improve? I think we've sort of touched on this a little bit before, but I think knowing how to code, or perhaps more broadly, having that appreciation of the development processes and what development needs from you. Do you think that can improve the communications that the BA provides, or perhaps the collaboration ultimately between the business analysts, the developers, and the testers? Nitin?
It does. Absolutely, it does, John. To just give you an example, on one of the projects I was working on, where my product owner requested for the data, there was a journey. We wanted to find out who are the registered customers, who are not. We wanted to send out a few emails related to marketing, and they requested me to find out this data. I was proficient enough in writing that basic query, or I would say let's call it as logic, to get that data from the team. And when you learn these skills, you become self-sufficient, and you become more resourceful. And I've been saying this word resourceful quite few times now, but that is what we are. We have to be resourceful. We have to help tech team as well as business side as well. So absolutely, it does help. It helps you in understanding those jargon. It helps you in better communication, better collaboration, better trust building, better credibility, everything. It does.
Yeah.
I think what will be a reassuring as well for BAs is that all the things we're talking about, you don't need to have for your first role. There are things that can develop, and your exposure to different projects and experience will shape that capability. So you don't have to have it from the start.
Yeah. And
thanks for calling that out, John.
Yeah. And I know, because I think when a newcomer comes to a conversation like this and they think, okay, well, where do I even start, right? There's so many things we've talked about so far, but there's a path forward for that. And I think we could probably collectively as a group help some folks make their way through it. I'll say that, to answer that question, John, I would say, I'll give you an instance. I was once on a project where I produced a state model, or what a lot of software developers call state machine model. And when the architect essentially looked at my deliverable to them, he looked at one of the developers and said, hey, Emal's going to put us out of a job, right? That was his take. And I know he said it jokingly, but I think that comment has stuck in my mind, because when they looked at that state model, the work that they would have had to do to clarify the business rules was now totally taken away from them, right? They looking at this and they're saying, okay, I'll have maybe 2 follow-up questions for you at some time in the future, but this tells me exactly what I need to know to start architecting the solution, right? So going back to your question, does it help you communicate with your developers? Yeah, if you learn how to communicate with developers in the language that they need to see, a lot of the friction that can exist between an analyst and a developer just totally disappears, right? To the point where they're just joking that you're trying to take their job essentially. So, and obviously I'm not capable of doing their job because there's so much more than that involved. But I think just hearing an architect say something like that sends me the message that, hey, what I've produced for this person downstream is exactly what they're looking for, and it has probably saved them hours, possibly days of deeper analysis work that they would have had to do if I hadn't delivered that piece, right? So that is kind of the peak level, I would say, of having good relationships with developers. I don't think I really could get any better than that, just because of, how some developers tend to be. But I think that's like the peak of how good of a relationship you can build with the developer once you start to speak their language and once you communicate your analysis, your business rules to them in a language that they understand. So hopefully that kind of sets a bit of a bar for a lot of analysts who may be experiencing a lot of friction with their developers. There are skills you can pick up to improve your ability to flow your analysis like deeper downstream into your development world in a way that you're developed. And look, a lot of folks, I think software developers sometimes get this reputation of just not being nice. That's not the problem. I think most developers, if we had a true appreciation for how hard their job was, we would understand why they're so frustrated with the rest of the organization and sometimes even with developers, because the level of complexity they have to deal with is immeasurable. And if they're on top of that, if they're not getting the answers that they need, it makes their job nearly impossible. And so that's why developers tend to just have this attitude of, look, give me what I need or get out of the way type of attitude oftentimes. And you can be the type of person who gives them what they actually need, and you'll find automatically your relationship is now way better with a developer than you ever thought. So
that's it.
Using
that empathy that you naturally have as a BA, I think, and applying it to the developers is absolutely the right thing, and in that situation, I always appreciate that, developers are not just waiting for your instruction and they just make it up there and then and figure out how to code. They have to keep it informed of like the latest coding practices. They probably have to look at technology and how to use it, and they're probably changing platforms. There's a load of things that as a BA I have no visibility of, but I know they have to keep their skills up to date, and there'll be different coding languages that evolve, and those languages probably evolve quicker than the models that we use as BAs evolve, I would say. So certainly, having a bit of an appreciation of some models that they can use and that we can use to communicate with them is really useful. And now you're talking about a state machine or a state transition diagram. It makes me think about, UML models, which I still find useful, unified modeling language, for those that don't know. A really good way to model data, behaviors, interactions in a way that normally the business can understand, but also technology as well, and it puts yourself in the shoes of thinking, well, if someone's developing a workflow, for example, what is the life cycle? How do we represent that? That's the state transition diagram. Then we can start to hang off that. What data should we be capturing or transitioning at each stage? Is there an interface that needs to relate to each stage? Are there permissions? And you can start to build up that story. And when you build the story up, you don't need to rely on having all the answers or even knowing all the questions yourself. As long as you're speaking to the business, and in this case, speaking to development, they can tell you some of those other questions that they now need to ask. And you can do that in a collaborative working environment with the developers, with the BAs, with the business, and just start to flesh out what you know, flesh out what you don't know, flesh out what you need. And then actually that picture almost paints itself. And as a BA, perhaps you can go away and find some answers to allow the developers to develop that workflow, in my example.
Yeah. This reminds me of one more thing, John. When I review those, it's part of J testing, which is Java testing. BAs usually don't do that, but as to build that trust, to build that bonding with the developers and making sure that the codes which we are releasing are bug-free and are scalable. So as part of my daily routine, I do that. I review the test cases, unit test cases, which the developers have written, making sure that all the scenarios are covered. And this also reminds me of one more thing which Emal was pointing out, that speaking the language of developers. So when I was working with the data team, my core focus was understanding what the data architecture is, what are microservices, what is monolithic architecture. And when I moved to a digital team, my focus was on APIs, what is post, what is patch. So that is really important. You have to adapt. You have to adapt to the language or the project you're working on.
That's it. And that goes back to that point. I think it was Emal made about being a translator a little while ago.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
It's no good being a translator if the language you're using to converse with technology is a language they used 20 years ago. You know, you need to keep up to speed and share the same information with them. I always find as well, which is quite an interesting point relating to what we've been saying and what you said there, Nitin, is that sometimes, you're sort of starting to develop the good relationships with the development team. You've sort of worked on some of those models, perhaps that state transition diagram, you've shared it with development. They've gone away and had a think about the code. If they invite you to come and have a look at their code, because typically it's quite logical, and I think as BAs with a logical mindset, we can normally read code, even though we're not necessarily entirely certain of every intricacy of it. I can normally get the gist of what it's trying to tell me. And sometimes developers will show me the code to say, these are the rules. My equivalent to an if statement might be an else statement in there, and they'll sort of show these are the rules. Do they sound logical? And you build up that relationship of being a sounding board to each other, as you should be in a collaborative environment.
Absolutely. The focus should be understanding the logic rather than going into details how that code is written. So that's my take.
I feel like we're going into the territory of the final question now, Nitin, with that one. And I mean, definitely, I think logic is an excellent point to transition into that last question, which is really, advice to any new BAs out there, or BAs in general, really, that have an interest in coding or development or learning a little bit more about some of the concepts we've spoken about. I think it was Emal might have mentioned SQL would be a good place to start. But do you have any similar advice or different advice to new BAs as to where they might make a start to get that insight? And that's to you, Nitin. Sorry.
Sorry. I thought Emal is taking that question. For me, the start should be SQL. Honestly, John, that's a very basic base. I never see SQL as a coding language. It's a logical. Those are logical steps, actually. So that should be the start, and then build on skills like Python if you want to go into data analytics field. It, like Emal rightly said few minutes back, it completely depends what career you want to take. For a new BA who are starting their career, and if they want to explore, they want to increase the horizon of the job search, SQL is a good start to go ahead with it.
Excellent, thank you. Emal?
Yeah, I would say, I think we're all in agreement here. I think SQL is probably the place you want to start, because it just gives you the biggest bang for your buck when it comes to some of the stuff that analysts are expected to do, right? Let's say even if you're an application support analyst and a ticket comes in that you have to triage. If you have SQL, you might be able to just dive into the database and do some basic triage work to try to figure out is this just a data issue? Is there something else that's going on? It can help you answer a lot of those types of questions. And there are many instances. Somebody might send you a request for an ad hoc report. There you go. Another situation where SQL can help. So that's the right starting place. I'll tell you, I'll throw in one more skill set in here that is probably on nobody's radar, but I use it probably more often than even I'd like to use it, but that is the skill of regular expressions. So I haven't learned Python, I haven't learned Perl, but I can probably get the benefits of having learned both of those two languages through something called regular expressions. Okay, I won't go into it in too much detail, but developers for sure know what that is. For analysts, in summarized view of what it can help you do is that it can, if you're ever on a data cleansing project or a data migration project, it is a very powerful tool that can help you start to apply some rules that can help you cleanse large data sets. So again, I have never heard anybody talk about this skill, But once you learn SQL and you're looking for the next thing and you like to work with data and you think you're going to be on a data cleansing project sometime in the future, I would say aim for regular expressions. Way easier to learn than most coding languages, and you'll probably get like a good 60 to 80% of having to learn Python. You get a benefit of that for your own career. So that's just the last little tidbit I'll throw in there. Beginners, don't worry about that stuff. Focus on core skills and then SQL.
Yeah, and if anyone does take Emal's advice and goes and learns regular expression, when you become an expert, give me a shout and we can have a session, a BAInsights session on what you've learned as well. And we won't forget to give Emal the credit on that one as well. I mean, and really to add to what you've both said, I think in terms of that starting point, for me, it's a very related starting point. So I agree. I think SQL was my first exposure, I think, to get involved in coding and understanding it. And I think the thing that helped me understand SQL was asking a question around the database schema, which was a concept I hadn't heard of at the time. And I remember, asking questions around, what are the data, where's the data, how is it stored, what format is it, what are the attributes even called, so I can make inquiries on it. And so asking about the picture of the data, the database schema, the data layout, whatever you want to call it, will give you that picture and that map of what the available attributes are, maybe how the tables relate to each other, and it might help you with your queries as well. But that was the only tidbit I think I could add to what you both said. And I think really on that point, it feels like a good point to close the session. I feel like today fundamentally we obviously explored the topic of whether BAs need to learn how to code. I think at a high level, the answer is, it's not essential. It's definitely helpful. I think recognizing that coding can mean many things in different languages, in different tools, and for different reasons. We don't all have to be an expert in all of these areas as well. We've also learned there's some things for BAs to go and explore, and probably most importantly, to not be afraid of speaking to the development team. As Emal said, they are generally nice people. I've got some really good people I've worked with who are developers, and they're definitely the best people to give you practical advice on coding as well. So maybe that's a good place to close. Apart from, of course, thanking you both for your time and your insight. Been interesting for me, and it's always good to speak to you both as well. So thanks very much to pairing.
Thanks, John. Thanks a lot.